Tonight, we are going to explore something very simple and very beautiful. We are going to explore the possibility that within you, beneath the noise and the hurry of your day, there lives a peace that has been waiting for you. A peace that does not depend on everything going right. A peace that does not ask you to become someone different. It is already here, quiet and patient, like still water at the bottom of a deep lake. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. In the Buddhist tradition, there is an ancient word for this quality. It is called passaddhi. It means tranquility, a deep settling of the body and mind. Not a forced stillness, but a natural easing, the way a leaf finally comes to rest on the surface of a pond after drifting slowly down from a tall tree. The Buddha once said that peace is the highest happiness. Not excitement, not achievement, not even pleasure. Peace. And tonight, we will gently walk that path together. We will sit with stories and teachings that have been shared for thousands of years, passed from teacher to student in quiet rooms and beneath open skies, all pointing toward this same simple truth, that a deep, abiding peace is not something far away. It is something close, something you can touch, even now, even here, even tonight. So settle in. Let your body soften. Let your breath find its own easy rhythm. And let's begin our journey together. The Buddha once said, "As the great ocean has but one taste, the taste of salt, so too does this teaching have but one taste, the taste of freedom." Tonight, let us begin with the ocean. Have you ever stood at the edge of the sea and watched the waves? Some days, the surface is gentle, barely moving, just the softest rise and fall as if the whole ocean is breathing. And some days, it is wild. The wind pulls at the water, the waves crash and tumble, foam spills across the rocks, and everything feels restless and unsettled. Our lives are a little like that. Some days are calm. Everything flows. The morning is easy, the afternoon is kind, and by evening we feel held by a gentle rhythm. And other days, it feels as though we are caught in rough water, tossed this way and that by worries, by obligations, by the sheer momentum of everything that needs to be done. The emails, the conversations, the list of tasks that never seems to get shorter, the feeling that something somewhere still needs our attention. But here is something worth knowing, something the ancient teachers discovered long ago, and something that you may already sense in your own quiet moments. No matter what is happening on the surface of the ocean, if you were to dive down, even just a little way, you would find that things begin to change. The noise of the wind fades. The pull of the current softens. The frantic energy of the surface gives way to something gentler, something slower, something kinder. And if you go a little deeper still, you would find a kind of stillness that is hard to describe. A vast, quiet, spacious calm. The waves are still there, up above, doing what waves do. But down here, it is peaceful. Down here, there is room to breathe. This is one of the oldest and most beautiful images in the Buddhist tradition. The idea that within each of us, beneath the surface of our busy thoughts and restless emotions, there exists a depth of peace that is always available, always present, always waiting. Not something we need to earn or achieve. Not something reserved for monks in mountaintop monasteries. Something already here. Something already ours. And the practice of meditation, the practice of simply being present with kindness and patience, is a way of learning to dive down. Let us explore a story about a child who loved the sea. This child grew up near a stretch of coastline where the water was warm and the sand was soft. Every summer, they would spend long afternoons playing in the shallows, splashing in the gentle surf, watching the sunlight scatter into 1,000 tiny sparks across the surface of the water. They loved the ocean more than almost anything, but they only knew its surface. They knew how to float on their back and watch the clouds drift overhead. They knew how to ride the small waves near the shore, laughing as the foam tickled their ankles. They knew the feel of wet sand between their toes and the warmth of the sun on their shoulders as they waded in the gentle places. But they had never gone beneath the surface. Not really. Not in a way that mattered. One summer, a grandparent came to visit. This was a quiet person, unhurried and gentle, someone who had spent many years living near the water. The kind of person who seemed to carry a certain stillness with them wherever they went, as though they had made friends with silence a long time ago. The child adored them. One afternoon, the two of them walked out to the shore together. The water was a little rougher than usual. A warm wind was blowing, and the waves were choppy, full of energy, slapping against each other and sending up little sprays of white. The child stood at the edge and frowned. "It is too rough today," they said. "We cannot go in." The grandparents smiled and waded in slowly, up to their waist. The water pushed and pulled at them, but they stood steady, like a stone in a stream. "Come," they said. "I want to show you something." The child hesitated, then followed. The water tugged at their legs, and they stumbled a little, catching their balance. "Now," the grandparent said softly, kneeling down so they were eye to eye. "Take a breath. A good deep breath. And come down with me. Just for a moment." "Under the water?" the child asked, eyes wide. "Just a little way. You will be safe. I am right here." The child looked at the choppy surface, then back at the grandparents' calm, steady face. They took a breath, and together they dipped below. And what the child found surprised them. Just a foot or two beneath the surface, everything changed. The sound of the wind vanished. The slapping and crashing of the waves became a distant, muffled hum, like a lullaby heard from another room. The push and pull of the current softened to a gentle, rocking sway, almost like being held. They opened their eyes and saw light filtering down through the water in soft golden shafts, bending and swaying like slow music. A tiny silver fish drifted past, completely unhurried, completely at ease, as though it had never known a moment of worry in its entire small life. They stayed under for just a few seconds, then came back up, gasping a little, water streaming down their face. Their eyes were shining. "It is so quiet down there," they whispered. "I did not know." The grandparent nodded, water dripping from their chin, the late afternoon light warm on their face. "It is always quiet down there," they said gently. "No matter what is happening up here, no matter how rough the waves, down there it is always still." The child stood in the water for a long moment, feeling the waves push against their chest while remembering the silence just beneath their feet. Two worlds, one right on top of the other, one full of noise and motion, and one full of peace. "Can I go again?" they asked. "As many times as you like," the grandparent said. "It will always be there." The child never forgot that afternoon. They carried it with them through the years, through school and friendships and all the ordinary trials of growing up. Through the busier years that followed, the years of work and responsibility and the 1,000 small pressures that fill an adult life. And whenever things felt overwhelming, Whenever the surface of their life was choppy and rough and full of noise, they would remember the grandparents' words. They would close their eyes and feel the water close gently over their head and hear the wind grow quiet and see the golden light bending softly through the blue. There is a place beneath all of this where it is still, and I can go there as many times as I like. It will always be there. This is what the Buddhist teachings on tranquility invite us to discover. Not an escape from life, but a depth within life. A place we can touch into, again and again, that steadies us and nourishes us and reminds us that we are more than the waves on our surface. The Pali word for this quality is passaddhi. It points to a settling, a calming, especially of the body. You may have noticed this in your own experience. When the mind begins to quiet, even a little, the body follows. The shoulders, which have been raised without you realizing it, begin to drop. The jaw, which has been clenched around some thought or worry, softens. The belly, which has been tight with the effort of holding everything together, releases just a little. There is a kind of unwinding that happens, layer by layer, like a spool of thread slowly letting go of its tension. And this unwinding can go deeper than we might expect. There is a beautiful observation from teachers in this tradition that meditation can take us to a place of rest that goes even further than sleep. Think about that for a moment. You might have a perfectly fine night of rest. You might wake up feeling reasonably well, stretch, pour your tea, begin your morning. And yet, when you sit down to meditate, even for a short while, something more begins to release. Some layer of tension you did not even know you were carrying starts to soften. Some quiet corner of your body, your neck, your hands, the small muscles around your eyes, that was holding on without your awareness, finally lets go. It is as though sleep takes care of the surface, but meditation reaches the deeper waters. Sleep smooths out the waves, but sitting quietly, with attention and kindness, takes you beneath them. Not because there is anything wrong with sleep. Sleep is wonderful and necessary and good. But there is a difference between resting on the surface of the ocean and diving down to where the water is truly still. The Buddha described this kind of peace as something that grows naturally when the conditions are right. He spoke of it not as something we force into being, but as something that arises on its own, the way a flower opens when it receives enough sunlight and water. We do not have to pry the petals apart. We do not have to command the bloom. Our work is simply to create the conditions, to offer warmth, to offer patience, to offer space, and then to gently get out of the way. Let us sit with one more story before we rest. This one comes from a classroom in a busy city, in a neighborhood where life was not always easy. A teacher in this school had begun offering a simple mindfulness practice to the young students. Nothing complicated, nothing fancy, just a few minutes each day of sitting quietly together, paying attention to the breath, noticing how the body felt. The children were young, perhaps 8 or 9 years old. Some of them came from homes full of warmth and laughter, but many of them carried worries that were far too heavy for such small shoulders. Their little nervous systems were always on alert, always watching, always ready for whatever might come next. The teacher was not sure the practice would take root. Would the children sit still? Would they find it strange? Would they resist being asked to close their eyes in a room full of other people? But something unexpected happened. The children took to it almost immediately, and not because they understood the philosophy behind it, or because they cared about ancient traditions. They took to it because, For many of them, it was the first time anyone had given them permission to simply stop, to not perform, to not be ready, to not watch the door. For just a few minutes each day, the classroom became something different. A gentle place, a quiet harbor. After a few weeks, the teacher noticed something had shifted. The children were calmer, not just during the practice, but after it. There were fewer arguments, more patience. A softness had entered the room that had not been there before. One day, a young girl stayed behind after class. She was a quiet child, someone who often sat near the back and watched the world with large, careful eyes. She walked up to the teacher's desk, holding a piece of paper folded in half. "I wrote something," she said softly, looking down at the floor. "About the breathing time. May I read it?" the teacher asked. The girl nodded and placed the note on the desk. Then she turned and walked out of the room, her shoes quiet on the floor. The teacher unfolded the paper. On it, in careful handwriting, the girl had written that when she sat quietly and paid attention to her breathing, she felt a kind of peace she had only ever felt in one other place. Sitting quietly in a garden, beside the resting place of someone she had loved very much, someone who had been a source of warmth and kindness and safety in her young life. That was the only other place where the world had ever felt that gentle. And now she had found it again, right here, in her classroom chair, with her eyes closed and her hands resting in her lap. The teacher sat with that note for a long time. The classroom was empty now. The late afternoon light was coming through the windows, falling softly across the rows of small desks. Somewhere down the hall, children were laughing. What a remarkable thing, that this depth of peace was not far away. It was not hidden in some distant monastery or locked behind years of study and discipline. It was right here, in an ordinary room, in an ordinary chair, available to a child who simply needed someone to say, "It is all right to stop. It is safe to be still." This is the invitation that the Buddha's teaching offers us, tonight and always. It is not asking you to go somewhere else. It is not asking you to become someone else. It is not asking you to fix or change or improve yourself in any way. It is simply asking you to notice what happens when you stop running, stop reaching, stop holding on so tightly, and allow yourself to settle. Like silt in a glass of water. When the water is stirred, everything is cloudy. You cannot see through it. You cannot see to the bottom. But if you simply set the glass down and wait, the silt begins to drift downward, little by little, grain by grain, all on its own. You do not have to force the clarity. You do not have to push the silt to the bottom. You only need to stop stirring. In time, the water clears. There is a well-known teaching from the Zen tradition that says, sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes, and the grass grows by itself. This is the spirit of tranquility. It is not about effort. It is not about achieving a special state. It is about allowing what is natural to emerge when we finally make space for it. And it is worth saying, gently, that this kind of peace is not a luxury. It is not something only for people with quiet lives or empty schedules. That young girl in the classroom reminds us of this. Her world was not always gentle. Her life had already held its share of loss. And yet, the peace was there for her. It met her right where she was, in her ordinary chair, with her ordinary breath. It asked nothing of her except her willingness to stop, and to notice, and to receive. It is there for all of us, wherever we are, whatever we carry. The Buddha taught that this peace is not something we import from the outside. It is already woven into the fabric of our being, as natural as breathing, as close as our own heartbeat. We simply need to learn how to touch it. And we can learn. Gently, patiently, kindly. Like learning to swim. Like learning to dive down beneath the waves. As the teacher once said, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. So tonight, as you lie here, perhaps you might like to try something very simple. Imagine yourself at the edge of that warm ocean. Feel the sand beneath your feet. Hear the soft rhythm of the waves. And then, gently, let yourself go a little deeper. Not far, just a little way beneath the surface. Notice what it feels like when the noise begins to fade, when the pull of the current softens, when everything around you becomes quiet and still and spacious. You do not have to do anything with this feeling. You do not have to hold it or name it or make it last. Simply notice it. Simply rest in it for as long as it is here. This is your ocean. This depth of peace lives within you. It has always been here. And no matter what is happening on the surface, no matter how rough the waves may be, this stillness is always waiting, patient and kind, ready to welcome you whenever you are ready to arrive. Let us pause here for a moment. Notice how you are feeling. Allow your body to soften just a little more. And when you are ready, we will continue together. There is an old story, told in many forms across the centuries, about a young person who had everything. Comfort, shelter, fine meals, soft clothing, gardens full of flowers. Their life had been arranged so carefully, so lovingly, that very little of the world's roughness had ever reached them. And for a long time, this was enough. The days were pleasant. The nights were easy. There was nothing, it seemed, to worry about. But somewhere beneath all that comfort, something was stirring. A quiet restlessness, a sense that something important was missing, though they could not have said what it was. And then, one day, they went out walking. Let us explore this story together, because it is one of the most beloved in all of Buddhist teaching, and it carries within it a truth that touches nearly every life. On the first walk, this young person saw someone who was unwell. Perhaps they had seen illness before, in small ways, but something about this encounter was different. It landed differently. They stopped walking and watched as a frail figure moved slowly along the road, supported by a companion, each step careful and uncertain. The young person felt something shift inside their chest, a kind of tenderness they had not expected, a recognition that life, for all its beauty, also holds fragility, that even the strongest body is, in the end, a delicate thing, a vessel made of breath and warmth and years. They returned home that evening quieter than usual. They sat by the window as the sky turned soft with the colors of dusk, pink and amber and a deep, fading blue, and they thought about what they had seen. The servants brought food, and the lamps were lit, and the evening carried on as it always did. But something inside this young person had shifted. A small crack had appeared in the smooth surface of their comfortable world, and through that crack, a new kind of light was beginning to enter. On another walk, some time later, they encountered an elderly person resting beneath a tree. This person's hair was white as cotton, their face lined with the marks of many seasons. But what struck the young person was not the signs of age. It was the expression on the elder's face, a mixture of weariness and gentleness, as though they had carried much and set most of it down, as though they had learned, over many years, to hold life more lightly. The young person sat nearby for a while, saying nothing, just being close to this quiet stranger. And again something stirred, a deepening, a sense that time moves through all things, through all of us, like a river that never pauses, and that this is not something to fear, but something to understand, something to make peace with. On a third walk, they encountered loss. We will not linger here, because this is a place for rest, and some truths are best held lightly, like a candle flame you cup with both hands to keep the wind from reaching it. But let us simply say that this young person came to understand, in a way they had not understood before, that all things in this life are temporary, that nothing we love stays in exactly the same form forever. And rather than filling them with despair, this understanding began to open something in them. A door they had not known was there. Because here is the remarkable part of the story. After these three encounters, each one tender, each one quietly shaking the foundations of everything they thought they knew, they went out walking one more time. And on this walk, they saw someone different. Walking along a dusty road, in the warm light of late afternoon, they saw a figure approaching from the distance. This person wore simple robes, carried nothing, and walked with a pace that was neither hurried nor slow. Just steady, just even, like the rhythm of breathing. As the figure came closer, the young person noticed something they could not quite explain. There was a quality about this stranger that was unlike anything they had encountered before. It was not that the stranger was smiling, though there was a softness around their mouth that suggested they might smile easily. It was not that they looked particularly strong or healthy or well-fed. In fact, they seemed to own almost nothing at all. But there was a stillness about them, a calm that did not seem forced or performed. It seemed to come from somewhere deep inside, the way light comes from a lantern, not from the glass, but from the flame within. The young person stopped in the road and watched. The stranger walked closer, and for a moment, their eyes met. It was a brief look, nothing dramatic, just the quiet meeting of two gazes. But in that look, the young person felt something they had never felt before. A kind of recognition, as if this stranger knew something essential, something about how to live in a world that holds both beauty and impermanence, and had found a way to be at peace with all of it. The stranger passed by without a word and continued down the road, their simple robes swaying gently with each step until they disappeared around a bend in the path. And the young person stood there for a long time, alone on the dusty road, watching the place where the stranger had been. Who was that? They whispered. No one answered. But the question did not go away. It stayed with them through the evening, through the night, through the days and weeks that followed. And eventually, it changed the entire direction of their life. Because what they had seen in that stranger's eyes was not just calm. It was a deep, abiding peace. A peace that seemed to hold within it an answer to everything they had witnessed on those earlier walks. The fragility of health, the passing of time, the tender truth of impermanence. Somehow, this quiet person on the road had found a way to hold all of it and still be at peace. And the young person thought, if that is possible for one person, then perhaps it is possible for me. This is, of course, the story of how the one who would become the Buddha began his journey. And while the details have been told and retold in countless ways across the centuries, the heart of it remains the same. It was not a grand revelation that set him on his path. It was not a thunderbolt or a vision or a voice from the heavens. It was something far simpler and far more human. It was the sight of someone who was at peace. That is worth sitting with for a moment. Of all the things that could have changed a life, it was not a book or a teaching or a set of instructions. It was a presence, a living example of what peace looks like when it walks down a road on a warm afternoon. And this tells us something important about the nature of tranquility. It is not just something we feel on the inside. It is something that radiates outward. It is something other people can sense, even in a brief look, even from a distance. You may have experienced this yourself. Perhaps you have been in the company of someone who carried a certain quietness with them. Not someone who was withdrawn or distant, but someone who was simply at ease, present, unhurried. And being near that person, even without exchanging many words, you felt something in yourself begin to settle. Your breathing slowed. Your shoulders dropped. The knot in your stomach loosened, just a little. The Buddha spoke of this quality when he said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Sometimes that word is not spoken at all. Sometimes it is simply the quiet presence of a person who has found their way to some depth of stillness, and who carries that stillness with them like a gift. Let us explore another story, a quieter one. There was once a young student who traveled a great distance to study with a teacher who was known for an extraordinary sense of calm. People spoke of this teacher with a kind of wonder. Nothing disturbs them, they said. They are like a mountain, steady in every season. The student arrived at the small dwelling where the teacher lived, at the edge of a village surrounded by gentle hills. It was a simple place, a wooden house with a small garden, a few fruit trees, a path of smooth stones leading to the door. The student knocked, and the teacher opened the door. They were older, with kind eyes and a face that seemed to hold both warmth and stillness in equal measure. "I have come a long way," the student said, a little breathless from the journey. "I want to learn how to be at peace, how to find the kind of calm that nothing can shake." The teacher looked at them for a moment, then smiled gently. "Come in," they said. "Sit down. I will make tea." The student sat at a low wooden table while the teacher moved about the small kitchen, boiling water, choosing leaves, warming the cups. Every movement was slow and deliberate, but not in a stiff or self-conscious way. It was more like watching water flow over stones. Natural, easy, as if each gesture had all the time in the world. The student watched, fidgeting a little, eager to begin the teaching. But the teacher said nothing. They simply made tea. When the cups were ready, the teacher sat down across from the student and pushed a cup toward them. The steam rose in a thin, curling line, catching the afternoon light from the window. "Tell me," the teacher said, "what do you think peace looks like?" The student considered this. "I think it looks like you," they said honestly. "Nothing seems to bother you. You move slowly. You seem so calm. I want to be like that." The teacher took a sip of tea and set the cup down carefully. "And what do you think is happening inside me right now?" The student blinked. "I imagine your mind is very still, very clear, like a lake without any ripples." The teacher laughed softly, a warm sound, like the rustling of leaves. My mind has plenty of ripples, they said. I have worries. I have plans for the garden that may not work out. My knee aches when it rains. I was a little nervous before you arrived, because I was not sure I would have anything useful to say to you. The student stared. But you seem so peaceful. Ah, the teacher said, wrapping both hands around the warm cup. That is because peace is not the absence of ripples. Peace is learning to let the ripples come and go without believing they are the whole ocean. They sat together in silence for a while, drinking tea, listening to the sound of birds outside the window. I thought I would need to learn some great technique, the student said eventually. Some secret method. The teacher shook their head gently. There is no secret. You are already doing it. You? Doing what? Sitting, breathing, listening to the birds, feeling the warmth of the cup in your hands. You have been at peace for several minutes now, and you did not even notice. The student looked down at their hands, at the cup, at the thin line of steam still rising, and they realized that the teacher was right. Somewhere in the simple act of sitting and drinking tea and being present in this quiet room, the restlessness they had carried for so long had softened. Not vanished, just softened, like a fist slowly opening. They sat with this for a while. Outside, the afternoon light had shifted, and the garden was glowing with a warm, golden haze. A breeze moved through the fruit trees, and a few blossoms drifted down, settling on the path of smooth stones. I thought peace would feel like something arriving, the student said quietly. Like a door opening, or a light switching on. The teacher shook their head. It is more like snow melting. You do not see the exact moment it happens. You just notice, after a while, that the ground is soft and the stream is flowing again. The student smiled for the first time since they had arrived. So all this time, I was searching for something I was already sitting in the middle of. Like a fish looking for water, the teacher said. They both laughed, softly, and the sound of it was easy and kind, like two old friends who had known each other much longer than one afternoon. The student stayed for several days. They did not receive any great lectures or secret teachings. They helped in the garden. They swept the path. They drank tea in the afternoons and watched the hills change color as the sun moved across the sky. And each day, without any effort, without any technique, the peace deepened. Not because anything was being added, but because, little by little, the student was learning to stop carrying what they did not need. On the morning they left, the student stood at the door and said, I came here looking for peace. I think what I found instead is that I was the one keeping it away. The teacher nodded and placed a hand on the student's shoulder. That is the only lesson, they said gently. And it is enough. Peace is not something you go and get, the student repeated softly, as if tasting the words for the first time. It is something you stop leaving. This is one of the most comforting teachings in the Buddhist tradition, that peace is not far away, that it is not the reward at the end of a long and difficult journey. It is the ground beneath your feet, right now, if you are willing to stop and feel it. The Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki once said, "You are perfect, just as you are, and you could use a little improvement." There is such tenderness in that, such humor. It tells us that we do not have to wait until we are different, better, calmer, wiser, before we are allowed to rest. We can rest now. We can touch peace now, even with all our ripples. And perhaps this is what that young person on the dusty road all those centuries ago recognized in the calm stranger. Not perfection, not the absence of difficulty, but something more beautiful than either of those. A way of being with life as it is, with all its tenderness and impermanence, and finding that it is enough. That it is more than enough. That it is, in fact, the doorway to everything we have been looking for. The stranger on the road did not say anything. They did not teach a lesson or offer advice. They simply walked past, carrying their peace with them like a quiet lantern. And that was enough to change a life. You carry that same possibility within you. Your peace, quiet as it may be, is felt by the people around you. The steadiness of your breathing, the gentleness of your voice, the unhurried way you might set down a cup or hold a door. These small things ripple outward in ways you may never see, touching the people in your life, the way the calm stranger touched the young person on the road. Peace is not only a gift you give yourself, it is a gift you give to everyone you meet. Let us pause here for a moment. Let your breath be easy. Notice what is here, right now, just as it is. And when you are ready, we will continue together. Have you ever noticed that the wisest things you have ever understood about your own life did not come to you when you were busy? They did not arrive while you were answering messages, or ticking things off a list, or hurrying from one place to the next. They came later, in the quiet moments, in the pause between tasks, in the middle of the night perhaps, when the house was still and the world had finally stopped asking things of you, or on a long walk when your feet found a rhythm and your mind, at last, stopped trying so hard. The deepest truths tend to arrive softly. They do not shout. They do not compete with the noise. They wait patiently for a gap in the conversation. And if the conversation never pauses, if the noise never lets up, then those truths remain unheard. Not gone, just waiting. In the Buddhist tradition, there is a lovely phrase for this kind of quiet space. It has been called sacred leisure. Not leisure in the way we usually think of it, not entertainment, not distraction, not scrolling through a screen or filling the hours with pleasant noise, but a deeper kind of stillness, a willingness to do nothing at all and to let that nothingness be enough. Let us explore a story about a teacher who had forgotten how to stop. This teacher had spent many years offering wisdom to others. They led retreats and gave talks and answered questions and traveled from place to place, sharing what they knew about the path to peace. They were good at it. People admired them. Invitations kept coming, and they kept saying yes, because the work felt important, and because it is very easy to confuse being busy with being useful. But somewhere along the way, something had slipped. The teacher could not quite name it. They still knew the words for peace. They could still describe tranquility beautifully. But when they sat down at the end of the day, alone in a quiet room, they noticed that the peace they talked about so easily had become harder to feel. One afternoon, between obligations, the teacher borrowed a bicycle. It was an old thing, a little rusty, with a basket on the front and a bell that did not quite work. They had no destination in mind. They simply pedaled away from the retreat center, down a narrow lane lined with trees, out into the open countryside. The road was flat and empty. The air smelled of cut grass and warm earth. The only sound was the soft whir of the wheels and the occasional call of a bird somewhere in the hedgerow. After a while, the teacher realized something. For the first time in weeks, possibly months, they were not working. And more importantly, they were not thinking about work. They were not composing the next talk in their head, or reviewing the day's schedule, or mentally rehearsing a conversation they needed to have. They were simply riding a bicycle down a quiet road, feeling the wind on their face, watching the shadows of the trees slide across the ground. They slowed down. Then they stopped altogether, right there on the road, one foot on the ground, the bicycle leaning gently to one side. They stood there and breathed. And in that stillness, something opened. Something quiet and tender and unhurried. Something they recognized. The way you recognize a friend you have not seen in a very long time. "Ah," the teacher said softly, to no one. "There you are." It was peace. Not the kind they talked about in their lectures. The real kind. The kind that lives in the body, in the breath, in the feeling of warm sun on the back of your neck. It had not gone anywhere. It had simply been waiting for a gap in the noise. Waiting for the teacher to stop being a teacher, stop being busy, stop being useful, and simply be a person standing on a quiet road in the middle of a beautiful afternoon. A butterfly landed on the handlebar of the bicycle. It opened and closed its wings slowly, as if it too were in no hurry at all. The teacher watched it and felt something they could only describe as gratitude. Not for anything in particular, just a general quiet thankfulness for being alive, for being here, for this road and this sun and this moment that asked absolutely nothing of them. The teacher stood on that empty road for a long time, doing absolutely nothing. And it was the best they had felt in months, perhaps in years. There is a wonderful honesty in this story. Even people who have dedicated their lives to the path of peace can lose touch with it, not because they have failed, but because they have forgotten to stop. And if this can happen to a teacher, it can certainly happen to any of us. The Buddha himself spoke about this balance. He taught that effort is important, yes, but so is rest. He compared the spiritual path to the tuning of a stringed instrument. If the string is too tight, it will snap. If it is too loose, it will not play. The beautiful music comes when the tension is just right. And finding that balance often means being willing to loosen the string a little, to step back, to do less. This is a radical idea in a world that often tells us we should be doing more. That rest is something we have to earn. That stillness is laziness in disguise. But the ancient teachers saw it differently. They understood that some of the most important work we will ever do happens when we are not working at all. There is a reason for this, and it is a gentle one. Inside each of us, alongside the busy, capable, get things done parts of who we are, there exist quieter parts, softer parts, parts that carry our deepest intuitions, our most honest feelings, our truest sense of what matters. You might think of them as the shy members of a large family. They have important things to say, but they will not speak up while everyone else is talking. They need the room to be a little quieter first. They need to feel that someone is actually listening. When we fill every moment with activity, with planning, with noise, these shy voices do not disappear. They simply retreat a little further. They wait. They are patient, endlessly patient, but they will not compete for attention. And so, if we never make space for them, we may go through whole seasons of our life without hearing what they have to tell us, without receiving their gifts. and their gifts are not small. These are the parts of us that know, without being told, when something in our life is out of balance. These are the parts that sense, long before the mind catches up, that a relationship needs more tenderness, or that a commitment no longer serves us, or that some old grief is ready, at last, to be gently held and released. These are the parts that carry our deepest longing for peace, for meaning, for a life that feels true. But they will only speak when the room is quiet enough. Let us explore another story. This one takes place in a small village, long ago, in a valley between mountains, where the air was clean and the nights were very dark. In this village, there lived a woodcutter who was known for being the busiest person in the valley. Every morning, before dawn, they were up and moving, chopping wood, hauling water, mending fences, tending the garden, helping neighbors with their repairs. They worked from first light to last, and when the sun went down, they fell into bed, exhausted, only to rise again and do it all over. The villagers respected the woodcutter. "No one works harder," they said. And this was true. But what the villagers did not see, and what the woodcutter tried very hard not to feel, was that beneath all that busyness, there was a hollowness, a quiet ache, something unfed. One evening, an old wanderer passed through the village and asked to share the woodcutter's fire. The woodcutter agreed, though they were tired and not in the mood for company. They sat together in front of the hearth, watching the flames, saying nothing for a while. Finally, the wanderer spoke. "You work very hard," they said. "I do," the woodcutter replied. "There is always something to be done. And does it bring you peace?" The woodcutter was quiet for a moment. The fire popped and settled. An ember drifted upward and disappeared. "It brings me tiredness," they said honestly, "which I have mistaken for peace for a very long time." The wanderer nodded slowly, as though this was the most natural thing in the world. "Many people make that same mistake," they said. "They believe that if they are exhausted enough, the restlessness will stop. But exhaustion is not rest. Collapse is not surrender. And being too tired to think is not the same as being at peace." The woodcutter stared at the fire. "Then what is peace?" they asked. The wanderer thought for a while. "Do you remember," they said, "when you were young, before all this work began, how you used to sit by the river in the afternoons? Your mother told me about it once. She said you would sit there for hours, watching the water, listening to the birds, doing absolutely nothing. And she said you always came home from the river looking like a different child. Softer, more open, more yourself." The woodcutter felt something tighten in their chest. They did remember. They remembered the smooth stones along the bank, the way the water caught the light, the sound of it moving over the rocks, steady and unhurried. They remembered the feeling of having nowhere to be, of having nothing to prove, of being, for a little while, completely free. "That," the wanderer said gently, "is peace, and it is still in you. But you have buried it under so much doing that it cannot breathe." They sat together in the quiet for a long time. The fire burned low. The stars came out, one by one, through the open window. "What should I do?" the woodcutter asked softly. The wanderer smiled. "Less," they said. The woodcutter did not change everything overnight. That is not how real change works. But the next morning, For the first time in years, they did not rise before dawn. They lay in bed and listened to the birds beginning their first songs outside the window. The sound was so simple, so ordinary, and yet the woodcutter realized they had not truly heard it in a very long time. Later that morning, instead of going straight to the woodpile, they walked down to the river. The path was overgrown. It had been years since they had taken it, but their feet remembered the way. They sat on a flat stone near the water's edge. The river was the same as it had always been, clear and unhurried, moving over smooth rocks with a sound like quiet laughter. A leaf drifted past, spinning slowly. The sun came through the branches overhead and scattered into soft coins of light on the surface of the water. The woodcutter sat there for a long time. They did not think about the fence that needed mending. They did not plan the afternoon. They simply sat and breathed and watched the river do what rivers do. And after a while, something happened. It was not dramatic. There was no flash of insight, no sudden revelation. It was more like a door opening very slowly in a room they had forgotten existed. A warmth in the center of their chest, a loosening behind the eyes, a feeling, quiet but unmistakable, that said, yes, this is what you have been missing. They returned to the village that afternoon and did their work, but differently. A little slower, with a little more space between the tasks. And that evening, instead of falling into bed, they sat on the doorstep and watched the stars appear, one by one, as the valley filled with gentle darkness. The wanderer had already moved on, but the word they left behind stayed with the woodcutter for the rest of their life. Less. Such a small word. Such a large permission. There is such wisdom in that single word. Less. Not nothing. Not the abandonment of responsibility. Not a retreat from the world. Just less. Enough space in the day for the shy voices to come out. Enough stillness for the deeper parts of ourselves to breathe. The Zen tradition speaks of this with beautiful simplicity. When walking, just walk. When eating, just eat. Not walking while planning. Not eating while worrying. Just the thing itself, given your full and gentle attention. And in that simplicity, a kind of peace emerges that no amount of busyness can provide. You may have felt this in your own life. Perhaps there was an afternoon when you had nothing scheduled, and instead of filling it, you simply sat. Maybe you looked out a window. Maybe you held a warm cup in your hands and watched the steam drift upward. Maybe you listened to the rain. And in that quiet, something opened. Something eased. The world did not change, but your relationship to it softened, just enough to let some light in. This is the gift of sacred leisure. It does not ask you to accomplish anything. It does not ask you to become a better version of yourself. It simply asks you to be here, fully here, without agenda, without ambition, without the constant hum of what comes next. And when you do that, when you truly pause and let the silence gather around you like a warm blanket, you may be surprised by what comes forward. A feeling you had forgotten, a clarity you did not expect, a tenderness toward yourself and your life that had been waiting quietly for exactly this kind of moment. The Buddha said, "In the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you." And each of these requires a certain stillness, a willingness to stop doing long enough to feel, to stop performing long enough to be real. to stop running long enough to notice what is already and has always been right here. So tonight, as you rest, you might simply notice the quiet around you, not as something empty, but as something full of possibility, full of space, full of all the gentle, patient, shy things that have been waiting for you to slow down. You do not need to listen for anything in particular. You do not need to search for a message or a meaning. Simply be here, in the stillness, and trust that what needs to come forward will come forward in its own time, in its own way, like a small animal stepping out of the woods when the forest is finally quiet enough. Your shy voices are patient. They have waited this long. They are happy to wait a little longer. But they are also happy, so very happy, when you make room for them at last. Let us pause here for a moment. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. Let the stillness hold you, and when you are ready, we will continue together. Sometimes, the most useful question we can ask ourselves is not, "How do I find peace?" but rather, "Where did I set it down?" Because the truth is, peace does not usually leave us all at once. It does not vanish in a sudden flash, like a candle blown out by a gust of wind. More often, it slips away gradually, so quietly that we do not even notice it is gone until we reach for it and find the space where it used to be is empty. We went about our day. We answered the messages, made the plans, worried the worries. And somewhere along the way, without meaning to, we traded our peace for something else. Something that felt urgent at the time, but that we can barely remember now. The ancient teachers understood this. They knew that trying to build peace without understanding how we lose it is like trying to fill a bowl that has a crack in the bottom. You can pour and pour, but it will never stay full until you attend to the crack. And so, alongside all the beautiful teachings about cultivating calm and joy and stillness, there runs a quieter, more practical thread. A thread that asks us to become curious about our own patterns of agitation. Not to judge them, not to fight them, simply to notice them, the way you might notice a small leak in a roof. Ah, there it is. That is where the rain gets in. Let us explore a story about a potter who lived in a small town at the edge of a wide, slow river. This potter was skilled at their craft. They could shape a bowl so thin that light passed through it, and so strong that it would last for years. People came from neighboring villages to buy their work, and the potter took great satisfaction in the making. The feel of wet clay under their hands, the slow turning of the wheel, the quiet concentration of shaping something useful and beautiful from a simple lump of earth. But the potter had a habit, and like many habits, it was so familiar that they barely noticed it anymore. Whenever they finished a piece, a bowl or a cup, or a wide, shallow dish, instead of setting it aside to dry and beginning the next one with a fresh mind, they would immediately start thinking about everything else that needed to be done. The kiln needed cleaning. The glaze was running low. A customer had complained about a chipped rim. The roof of the workshop leaked when it rained. Their neighbor had said something sharp the other day, and the words were still turning over in the potter's mind like stones in a stream. By the time they sat down to shape the next piece of clay, their hands were steady but their mind was churning, and the churning showed in the work. The walls of the bowl came out uneven. The lip was not quite smooth. The potter would frown, crush the clay back into a ball, and start again, more frustrated than before. One afternoon, the potter's old teacher came to visit. This was a person of great patience and warmth, someone who had taught the potter everything they knew about clay and fire and the slow art of making things with your hands. The teacher sat quietly in the corner of the workshop and watched the potter work. They watched for a long time without saying anything. They watched the potter finish a cup, set it aside, and then watched the change that came over the potter's face. The subtle tightening around the eyes, the slight clenching of the jaw, the way the shoulders crept upward, just a fraction, as the mind left the present moment and traveled out into the long list of worries and obligations. After a while, the teacher spoke. "May I ask you something?" The potter looked up. "Of course. When you were shaping that cup just now, where were you?" The potter thought about it. "I was here, right here. And were you at peace?" The potter considered this. "Yes," they said slowly. "I think I was. When I am shaping the clay, when my hands are moving and the wheel is turning, everything else goes quiet. It is the best part of my day." The teacher nodded. "And what happened after you finished the cup?" The potter opened their mouth to answer, then closed it again. They could feel the truth of it before they could put it into words. "I left," they said quietly. "I was here and then I left. My body stayed, but my mind went somewhere else. To all the things I have not done yet. To all the problems I have not solved." "Yes," the teacher said gently. "I watched it happen. It was like watching someone step out of a warm room into the cold. Your whole body changed." The potter sat with this for a moment. The workshop was quiet. Late afternoon light came through the windows and fell across the rows of drying bowls, turning them the color of honey. "I did not realize I was doing it," the potter said. "That is exactly the point," the teacher replied. "We rarely do. The movement from peace into agitation is so habitual, so practiced, that it happens beneath our awareness. Like water finding its way downhill. It does not need to be told where to go. It just follows the grooves that have been worn into the ground over time." The potter looked down at the clay beneath their fingernails. "It is strange," they said. "When my hands are on the wheel, I know exactly what I am doing. I can feel when the clay is too thick or too thin. I can feel when the shape is right. But with my own mind, I cannot feel anything. It just carries me away." "That is because you have trained your hands," the teacher said. "You have spent years learning to feel the clay. You know its language, but you have not yet learned the language of your own restlessness. You have not sat with it the way you sit with a difficult shape. How does one learn that?" The teacher picked up one of the finished bowls from the drying rack and held it to the light. It was a simple piece, but lovely, the walls even, the glaze a soft blue-gray, like a winter sky. "The same way you learn to make this," the teacher said. "Slowly, with patience, with curiosity, not trying to fix anything, just paying attention. The next time you feel yourself leave the peaceful place, do not try to pull yourself back. Just notice. Ah, I was here and now I have gone somewhere else. What happened? What was the thought? What was the feeling? Where did I feel it in my body? Treat it like a new piece of clay. Turn it in your hands. Get to know its weight, its texture, its shape." The potter considered this. "You are not asking me to stop worrying." "No," the teacher said. setting the bowl down carefully. I am asking you to watch yourself worry. There is a great difference. One is a struggle. The other is a kind of kindness. The teacher stayed for the rest of the afternoon. They sat together in the quiet of the workshop, and the potter returned to the wheel. This time, when they finished a piece and felt the familiar tug of the mind toward the next worry, they paused. They did not follow the tug. They simply noticed it. The slight quickening of the breath, the tension in the jaw, the feeling, almost physical, of something reaching for the next thing. And in noticing it, something unexpected happened. The tug softened, not all at once, not completely, but enough. Enough for the potter to take one more breath, to feel their feet on the floor, to hear the soft drip of water from the sponge beside the wheel. Enough to stay, just a moment longer, in the peaceful place. It was a small thing, a single extra breath. But the potter understood, with a certainty that went deeper than words, that this was how it would go. Not a grand transformation. Just this, one breath at a time, one noticing at a time, the grooves growing a little shallower with each small act of attention. So what do I do? The potter asked later that evening, as the teacher prepared to leave. The teacher smiled. You do not have to stop the water, they said. You just have to see the grooves. Once you see them, really see them, they begin to lose their power. The water still flows, but it flows more slowly. And sometimes it finds a new path altogether. This is one of the most freeing ideas in the Buddhist tradition, that we do not have to fight our agitation. We do not have to wrestle it to the ground or shame it into silence. We simply have to see it clearly, to understand how it works, to become familiar with the small, invisible movements of the mind that carry us from peace into restlessness, often without our even noticing. And when we begin to pay attention, truly pay attention, we start to see patterns. We notice that certain thoughts have a particular flavor of urgency that is not quite real. We notice that the feeling of "I do not have enough time" is often more about a state of mind than an actual shortage of hours. We notice that the momentum of doing, the rush from one task to the next, can become a kind of habit in itself, a wheel that keeps spinning even when there is nothing left to grind. There is a common experience that many people share, and perhaps you will recognize it. You have a busy day, a long list of things to do. You move through them one by one, efficiently, capably, and then you finish. The list is done. And instead of feeling relief, instead of settling into the satisfaction of completion, you feel something else entirely. A restlessness, a buzzing, a voice in the back of your mind that says, "What is next? There must be something next. Something is wrong if there is nothing next." That voice is not telling the truth. Nothing is wrong. The list is done. But the habit of doing has built up so much momentum that the mind does not know how to stop. It is like a dog chasing its tail. The running has become the point, and the dog has forgotten that there was never anything to catch. Seeing this clearly, even once, is a kind of liberation. Not because the habit disappears. It may not, at least not right away, but because you are no longer fooled by it. You can feel the momentum arise, and instead of following it, you can simply nod and say, "Ah, there you are again. I know you. You are the habit of busyness, and I do not need to follow you right now." Let us sit with one more small story. There was once a traveler who arrived at a village inn, tired from a long journey. They asked the innkeeper for a room, and the innkeeper showed them upstairs to a small, clean room with a window that looked out over a quiet courtyard. "This is lovely," the traveler said. "I will sleep well here." But as they began to settle in, they noticed a faint sound. A tapping. Very quiet, very rhythmic, coming from somewhere behind the wall. It was barely noticeable at first, but the more the traveler listened, the louder it seemed to become. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. They tried to ignore it. They lay down and closed their eyes. But now the tapping was all they could hear. It filled the room. It seemed to vibrate in their teeth. They went downstairs, irritated. "There is a tapping in my room," they said. "I cannot rest." The innkeeper looked puzzled. "A tapping? Let me come and listen." They went upstairs together. The innkeeper stood in the middle of the room, head tilted, listening carefully. After a long moment, they smiled. "Ah," they said, "that is the branch of the old plum tree. It grows just outside the wall. When the breeze comes in the evening, the smallest branch taps against the stone." The traveler frowned. "Can you cut it?" The innkeeper shook their head gently. "I could. But may I suggest something else? Come and see it." They walked together to the courtyard, and the innkeeper pointed to the tree. It was old and beautiful, with a trunk that curved gracefully and branches that spread wide, covered in pale blossoms. The smallest branch, thin as a finger, was swaying gently in the evening breeze, just barely touching the stone wall of the inn. "It has been here longer than the inn," the innkeeper said. "Every evening, when the breeze comes, it taps. Some guests find it maddening. Others find it soothing, like a heartbeat." The traveler looked at the tree for a long time. They looked at the blossoms, pale and delicate in the fading light. They watched the small branch sway and touch the wall, sway and touch, sway and touch. "It is quite beautiful," they said, surprised by their own words. "It always was," the innkeeper said. "You just had not seen it yet." The traveler went back to their room. They lay down. The tapping was still there, gentle and steady. But now, instead of hearing an annoyance, they heard the plum tree. They heard the breeze. They heard the evening settling softly over the courtyard. And within a few minutes, they were asleep. Nothing had changed. The sound was the same. The room was the same. But the traveler's relationship to the sound had shifted, and that shift was everything. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught that suffering comes not from our experiences themselves, but from our relationship to them. The tapping was never the problem. The resistance to the tapping was the problem. And once that resistance softened, once the traveler could see clearly what was actually happening, the very thing that had disturbed their peace became part of it. We carry so many small resistances through our days. Small tensions, small aversions. The traffic is too slow. The room is too warm. The person beside us is chewing too loudly. None of these things, in themselves, have the power to steal our peace, but our resistance to them does. Our insistence that things should be different from the way they are, that is the crack in the bowl. That is where the peace leaks out. And the good news, the wonderfully gentle good news, is that we do not have to fix every crack. We simply have to notice them. to look at them with curiosity instead of frustration, to say, that is where I lose my peace. That is the groove, the water follows. And in the seeing, something softens, something releases. The groove grows a little shallower. The water flows a little more slowly. And peace, which was never really gone, begins to gather again, quietly, like dew forming on grass in the early morning. Let us pause here for a moment. You are doing beautifully. Simply rest. Simply breathe. And when you are ready, we will continue together. It is a remarkable thing, when you think about it, how hard everyone is trying. Not just you, not just the people you love. Everyone. The person who cut in front of you in line, the one who spoke too sharply at a meeting, the neighbor who never waves back, the stranger on the train with the tired eyes. Every single one of them is carrying something. A worry, a loss, a fear they cannot quite name, a hope that did not turn out the way they expected, a quiet ache they have not told anyone about. We are all walking around with invisible luggage. Some of it is old, packed so long ago we have forgotten what is inside. Some of it is new, gathered just this morning, the sharp word we overheard, the bill we did not expect, the small disappointment we swallowed without a sound. And most of us carry this luggage in silence, because somewhere along the way we learned that we should be able to manage it alone. That asking for help is a kind of failure. That strength means never letting anyone see the weight. But what if that is not true? What if strength is something else entirely? The Buddhist tradition holds this understanding at its very center. The first thing the Buddha ever taught, the very first words he offered after his awakening, was that life involves difficulty. Not as a punishment, not as a mistake, simply as a fact, as natural and unavoidable as the weather. And from this understanding, he offered not a solution or a fix, but something far more tender. He offered compassion, the recognition that if life is difficult for you, it is difficult for everyone, and that this shared tenderness, this common vulnerability, is not a weakness. It is the very thing that connects us all. There is a word for this in the Pali language, the language the Buddha spoke. It is karuna. It means compassion, a deep and boundless wish for all beings to be free from suffering. Not pity, which looks down. Not sympathy, which keeps a polite distance. But compassion, which moves toward the difficulty, sits down beside it, and says simply, I am here. Let us explore a story about two neighbors. They lived side by side in a small village, separated by a low stone wall that ran between their gardens. One of them was a healer, known throughout the valley for a gentle touch and an endless willingness to help. Whenever someone in the village fell ill or was injured, the healer was there, mixing remedies, sitting through long nights, offering comfort with steady hands and kind words. People relied on this person deeply. What would we do without you? They often said. The healer smiled when they heard this, but the smile never quite reached their eyes. Because what the villagers did not know, what the healer had never told anyone, was that their own life was quietly unraveling. Their savings were nearly gone, spent over the years on herbs and supplies, and on helping those who could not pay. Their roof had needed mending for 2 winters now, and the rain came in through the corner of the bedroom, dripping into a clay pot that had to be emptied each morning. Their hands, so steady when they worked on others, trembled sometimes in the evenings when they sat alone. The other neighbor, a quiet farmer, had noticed some of this. They had seen the healer working late by candlelight, had heard the drip of rain through the roof on stormy nights, had noticed how the healer's clothes had grown a little threadbare, how their step had lost some of its lightness. One afternoon, the farmer appeared at the healer's door carrying a covered dish. "I made too much soup," the farmer said. This was not true, but it was a kind way to offer what was needed without making it feel like charity. The healer looked at the dish, then at the farmer. Something moved across their face, a ripple of emotion they quickly tried to smooth away. "Thank you," the healer said, taking the dish. "But you do not need to do this. I am fine." The farmer did not move from the doorstep. They looked at the healer with steady, gentle eyes. "You have spent years taking care of everyone in this village," they said. "Every single person here has been held by your kindness at some point. But I have been wondering something for a long time. What is that? Who takes care of you?" The healer opened their mouth to answer, but no words came. They stood in the doorway holding the warm dish, and for a moment, the composure they had worn for so many years wavered. Their eyes glistened. Their lips pressed together. "I do not know," they whispered. The farmer nodded, as though this was exactly what they had expected to hear. "Then let me begin," they said simply. "I will come tomorrow to fix your roof." And they did. The next morning, just after dawn, the farmer arrived with a ladder and tools. They worked through the morning while the healer sat in the garden, feeling strange and uncertain, unused to being on this side of care. At one point, the healer brought a cup of tea up to the farmer on the roof. "You do not have to do all of this," the healer said, shading their eyes against the sun. The farmer took the tea and sat on the edge of the roof, legs dangling, looking out over the village. Smoke was rising from a few chimneys. Children were playing in the lane. It was a perfectly ordinary morning. "Do you remember," the farmer said, "the winter my youngest was ill? The fever that would not break?" The healer nodded. "I remember. You sat with us for 3 nights. 3 nights without sleeping. You held cold cloths to my child's forehead and you sang to them when they cried. You did not ask for anything. You did not even let me thank you properly." The healer looked away. "That was different." "How?" "I was helping. That is what I do." The farmer took a slow sip of tea and looked at the healer with a kindness so steady it was almost difficult to meet. "And what do you think I am doing right now?" The healer could not answer. They stood at the base of the ladder and pressed their hand to their chest, feeling something they had not allowed themselves to feel in a very long time. The simple, almost unbearable sweetness of being cared for. Over the following weeks, other villagers began to notice. A young family brought firewood. An elderly couple left a basket of eggs by the door. A child picked wildflowers and placed them on the windowsill of the healer's workshop. No one made a fuss about it. No one gave speeches or organized grand gestures. They simply did what the healer had done for them, quietly, steadily, with love. And something in the healer began to mend. Not just the roof. Something deeper. Something that had been fraying for a long time, held together only by the habit of being strong. Like a cloth that had been washed too many times, the threads finally being rewoven, slowly and with great care. One evening, the healer and the farmer sat together in the garden as the sun went down. The sky was turning shades of rose and amber. A warm breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the hedge. "I have been foolish," the healer said softly. "How so?" "I believed that compassion was something I gave to others. I did not know it was also something I needed to receive." The farmer was quiet for a moment, pulling a long stem of grass between their fingers. "Perhaps it is like water," they said. "It needs to flow in both directions. A river that only gives and never receives will eventually run dry." The healer sat with this. The evening deepened. A single star appeared low on the horizon, bright and steady. "I think," the healer said, "I have been a river running dry for a very long time." "Then drink," the farmer said, and the word held so much tenderness that neither of them spoke again for a while. They did not need to. The garden held them, and the evening held the garden, and that was enough. There is a teaching in the Buddhist tradition that compassion must be universal and impartial. This sounds grand when you say it that way, but what it really means is something very simple. It means that no one gets left out. Not the people who are easy to love. Not the people who are difficult to love. Not the strangers we will never meet. And, importantly, not ourselves. This is where many of us stumble. We can find compassion for others readily enough. We see someone struggling, and our hearts reach out, naturally, instinctively. But when we ourselves are the ones struggling, something changes. A different voice takes over. A sterner voice. One that says, "You should be stronger than this. You should have figured this out by now. Other people have real problems. What is wrong with you?" The Buddha would have recognized that voice, and he would have smiled at it, gently, the way you smile at a child who is trying very hard to be grown up. Because that voice, for all its harshness, is usually trying to help. It thinks that if it is hard enough on you, you will try harder, do better, be more. But the Buddha understood something that voice does not. He understood that harshness does not lead to peace. It leads to exhaustion. It leads to the kind of brittle strength that holds until it snaps. True strength, the kind that lasts, the kind that deepens over time, grows from tenderness. From treating yourself the way you would treat a dear friend who came to you in pain. With warmth, with patience, with the willingness to say, "This is hard, and it is all right that it is hard. You are doing your best, and your best is enough." The Buddha said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. This is not vanity. This is not selfishness. This is the foundation upon which everything else is built. Because a person who has learned to be gentle with themselves becomes, almost without trying, gentler with everyone else. The compassion overflows. It finds its way out through the cracks, the way light finds its way through the gaps in a woven basket. Let us sit with one more small story. A student once asked a beloved teacher, "How can I have compassion for someone who has hurt me?" The teacher thought for a moment. Then they said, "Imagine that you are walking through the forest and a branch strikes you across the face. It stings. It may even draw blood. Would you be angry at the branch?" The student frowned. "No. The branch did not mean to hit me. The wind moved it." "Exactly," the teacher said. "And most people who hurt us are like that branch. They are moved by forces they cannot see and do not understand. By their own pain, their own fear, their own confusion. They are not aiming at you. They are caught in a wind they do not know how to stop. The student was quiet for a while. That does not make it hurt less, they said. No, the teacher agreed. It does not. But it changes the shape of the hurt. Instead of anger, there is room for something softer. Not approval, not forgiveness, if you are not ready for that. Just understanding. And understanding is the seed from which compassion grows in its own time, at its own pace. The student nodded slowly. And what about compassion for myself? For the hurt I carry? The teacher leaned forward. Their voice became very soft, as though they were sharing something precious. That is where you begin, they said. Always. You place your hand on your own heart first. You say to yourself, gently, the way you would say it to a child who is frightened, "This is hard, and I am here, and I am not going anywhere." It sounds so simple, the student said. Simple, yes, but not easy. We are trained, most of us, to be kind to others and hard on ourselves. We speak to ourselves in ways we would never speak to a friend. We hold ourselves to standards we would never impose on someone we love. And we call this discipline, or strength, or responsibility. But the Buddha would call it something else. What? Unnecessary suffering, the teacher said gently. And the beautiful thing is, it can be put down. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But a little at a time. Each time you catch yourself being harsh with your own heart, you have a choice. You can follow the old habit, or you can pause and say something kinder, even if it feels strange at first, even if a part of you resists it. The student sat quietly for a long time. The room was warm. A late shaft of sunlight was making its way across the floor. When you can do that for yourself, the teacher continued, truly do it, then doing it for others becomes the most natural thing in the world. Compassion is not a skill you master. It is a warmth you uncover. It has been there all along, waiting beneath the layers of self-criticism and the armor of trying to be perfect. This is one of the quietest and most powerful paths to the deep, abiding peace we have been exploring together tonight. Not through force, not through discipline, not through some heroic act of will, but through kindness, through the simple, radical act of being gentle with ourselves and with each other. It is hard to be a human being. It is hard for everyone. The person who seems to have everything together is carrying something you cannot see. The person who frustrates you most is fighting a battle you know nothing about. And you, right here, right now, with all your imperfections and your worries and your tender, complicated heart, you are doing something very brave simply by being alive and trying your best. The Buddhist tradition teaches that compassion is like a lamp. When you light it, it does not only illuminate the corner where you are standing, it fills the whole room, and anyone who walks in can see by its light. You have seen this in your own life, even if you did not name it at the time. You have been in the presence of someone whose kindness changed the atmosphere of a room, not through grand gestures, through small ones. The way they listened, the way they paused before speaking, as if your words truly mattered to them. The way they looked at you, not past you, but at you, with a warmth that asked for nothing in return. And you left that encounter feeling lighter, feeling softer, feeling more at home in your own skin. That is what compassion does. It does not fix. It does not solve. It simply holds. And in the holding, something heals. Your compassion, even the quiet, private kind you offer yourself when no one is watching, is that kind of lamp. It does not stay small. It cannot. That is not its nature. It reaches outward, gently, steadily, touching the people in your life in ways you may never fully know. So be kind to yourself tonight. You have earned it. Not through achievement, not through perfection, but simply by being here, by showing up, by carrying what you carry with as much grace as you can manage. That is more than enough. That is, in fact, everything. Let us pause here for a moment. Let yourself be held by the quiet. There is nothing more you need to do. And when you are ready, we will continue together. We have traveled a long way together tonight. Through the depths of the ocean and the quiet of the classroom, past the calm stranger on the dusty road and the shy voices waiting in the stillness, through the potter's workshop and the healer's garden. And now, as we come to the final chapter of our journey, let us sit with one of the simplest and most beautiful ideas in all of Buddhist teaching, that your peace is not just for you. There is a story told by a beloved teacher about a group of people crossing the sea in a small boat. The boat was not large. It was the kind of vessel built for calmer waters, with low sides and a shallow hull. But circumstances had brought these travelers together, and the boat was all they had. So they climbed aboard, dozens of them, shoulder to shoulder, knees pressed against the backs of strangers. The sides of the boat sat just inches above the waterline. Every small wave sent a shiver through the passengers. Every gust of wind made the vessel lean and sway. For a while, the sea was kind. The water was flat, the sky was clear, and the travelers began to settle into an uneasy calm. Some spoke quietly to one another. Some held the hands of the children seated beside them. Some simply looked out at the horizon, watching the slow curve of the earth where the water met the sky. And then, as the afternoon wore on, the weather began to change. Clouds gathered in the west, dark and heavy. The wind picked up. The surface of the water, which had been smooth as silk, began to ripple, then to chop, then to heave in long, rolling swells. The boat rocked. Water splashed over the sides. Someone cried out. Others gripped the edges of the boat, their knuckles white, their faces tight with fear. The children began to whimper. A murmur of panic rippled through the passengers, and as it did, the boat rocked harder, because frightened people move, and movement in a small boat is a dangerous thing. In the middle of this growing fear, one person did something very simple. They did not stand up and give a speech. They did not shout instructions or take command. They simply sat where they were, near the center of the boat, and became still. They placed their hands in their lap. They let their shoulders drop. They breathed, slowly and steadily, the way the sea itself breathes on a calm day. In and out. In and out. The person beside them noticed first. They had been gripping the side of the boat so tightly that their fingers ached, and when they glanced over and saw this calm figure sitting quietly amid the commotion, something shifted in them. Not a thought, exactly. Something more like a feeling. A small loosening in the chest. A whisper of the body that said, "Oh, perhaps it is possible to be still right now. Perhaps I do not have to hold on so tightly." They let go of the side, just a little. They took a breath, and then the person next to them noticed. They had been whispering anxious words to no one in particular, a stream of worry spilling out into the salt air. But when they felt the shift in the person beside them, the subtle settling, the slower breathing, something in their own body responded. Not because they chose it, because calm, when it is genuine, speaks a language older than words. The body hears it before the mind does, and the body responds. One by one, like candles being lit in a dark room, the stillness of that one calm presence began to spread through the boat. A mother stopped clutching her child so tightly and instead began to stroke the child's hair, softly, rhythmically. An old man who had been muttering prayers opened his eyes and looked up at the sky, noticing for the first time that between the dark clouds there were still patches of blue. A young person who had been rigid with fear let out a long, shaking breath and felt their hands unclench. No one said, "Be calm." No one was told to be still. It simply happened, the way warmth spreads through cold hands when you wrap them around a hot cup. Not because anyone was told to be calm, not because anyone was scolded or instructed, but because calm, real calm, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and true, is one of the most quietly powerful forces in the world. It does not need to announce itself. It simply is. And the people around it feel it, the way you feel warmth from a fire, even before you see the flames. The boat still rocked. The waves still came. The wind still blew. But the people in the boat were no longer rocking with it. They had found, through the example of one quiet person, a stillness inside themselves that the storm could not reach. And in time, the storm passed. The clouds thinned. The wind softened. The sea settled back into its long, slow breathing. And the boat, with all its passengers, carried on. This story has stayed with many people over the years because it holds within it a truth that is easy to forget. We often think of peace as something private, something personal. My peace, my calm, my inner life. And it is personal, of course. The journey inward is one that each of us must take alone. No one can meditate for you. No one can breathe for you. No one can do the quiet work of understanding your own heart on your behalf. But the fruits of that journey do not stay inside. They cannot. That is not how it works. When you are at peace, the people around you feel it. Your children feel it. Your partner feels it. Your friends, your colleagues, even the stranger standing behind you in line at the shop, they all feel it in small and subtle ways that neither they nor you may ever fully understand. The steadiness of your voice, the patience in your eyes, the way you do not rush to fill every silence, the way you listen, truly listen, as though the person speaking is the only person in the world. These things matter. They matter more than we know. The Buddha said, thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of that candle will not be shortened. Your peace does not diminish when it is shared. It grows. It multiplies. It lights something in the people it touches, and they, in turn, carry that light forward, often without realizing they are doing so. Let us explore one more story. a gentle one for the end of our journey. In a small town, there lived an old person who kept a tea house. It was a modest place, nothing grand, just a few low tables, some cushions on the floor, and a window that looked out over a garden where a plum tree grew. The tea was good but not extraordinary. The cups were plain. There was no sign outside, no advertisement, nothing to draw people in. And yet, the tea house was never empty. People came from all over the town, and eventually from neighboring towns as well, to sit in this small room and drink tea. They came in the morning before work. They came in the afternoon when the day felt long. They came in the evening when they were tired and needed a place to rest. And they always left feeling a little different from when they arrived. A little lighter, a little more at ease, as though some gentle hand had smoothed out the wrinkles of their day. A young person who had recently moved to the town was curious about this. They had heard people speak of the tea house with such warmth, such affection, and they could not understand what made a place with no sign and plain cups so beloved. So one afternoon, they went to see for themselves. The old person who kept the tea house greeted them at the door with a nod and a smile that was neither too wide nor too restrained. Just right. Just warm enough. They were shown to a cushion by the window where the light came through the plum tree's branches and made soft, dappled patterns on the floor. The tea arrived without being ordered. It was warm and fragrant, a simple blend, nothing exotic. The young person sipped it and looked around. The room was quiet. A few other guests sat at their tables, some alone, some in pairs, speaking in low voices. There was nothing remarkable about any of it. And yet, there was something in this room. The young person could feel it but could not name it. It was like a temperature, or a color, or a sound, just below the threshold of hearing. A quality in the air itself that made the shoulders drop and the breathing slow, and the thoughts, which had been circling all day like restless birds, finally come to rest. After a while, the young person called the old tea house keeper over. "May I ask you something?" "Of course," the old person said, settling onto a nearby cushion with the ease of someone who has been sitting on the ground for a lifetime. "What is it about this place? I have been trying to understand since I arrived. The tea is lovely, but it is just tea. The room is pleasant, but it is just a room. And yet everyone who comes here seems to leave feeling different, feeling better. What is your secret?" The old person was quiet for a long moment. They looked out the window at the plum tree, where a single bird was hopping between the branches. "There is no secret," they said finally. "When I was young, I spent many years trying to find peace. I traveled. I studied. I practiced. I searched in many places and with many teachers. And after all that searching, I found something very simple. I found that peace is not something you go out and find. It is something you become. And when you become it, everything around you begins to reflect it." They gestured around the small room with one weathered hand. "I do not do anything special here. I boil water. I pour tea. I sit. But I do these things from a place of peace. And people feel that. Not because I am trying to give them something, but because peace, when it is real, cannot be contained. It overflows. It fills the room. It fills the tea. It fills the space between two people sitting together in silence." The young person looked down at their cup. The tea was nearly gone. A single leaf had settled at the bottom, perfectly still. So the peace people feel here, the young person said, it is not in the tea. No, it is in you. The old person smiled, and the smile was like the plum tree outside, simple, unhurried, blooming for no reason at all. It is in me, they said, and it is in you, and it is in everyone who walks through that door. I have simply stopped getting in its way. The young person sat with this for a long time. Through the window, the afternoon light was deepening, turning gold, and the bird in the plum tree had begun to sing a small, repeating song. I have spent a long time, the young person said slowly, believing that I needed to fix myself before I could be at peace. That there was some problem to solve first, some knot to untangle. And is there? The old person asked. The young person thought. They thought about all the years of trying, the books they had read, the advice they had followed, the long nights spent worrying that they were not enough, not calm enough, not wise enough, not good enough. And sitting here, in this plain room, with this plain tea, beside this quiet person who boiled water and poured cups and asked for nothing, they felt something they had not expected. They felt that perhaps they had been enough all along, that the peace they had been chasing had been sitting right beside them the whole time, like a patient friend who never gives up, never grows frustrated, never walks away. No, the young person said quietly, I do not think there is. The old person reached over and refilled their cup. The tea steamed gently. Outside, the plum tree swayed in the evening breeze, and its shadow moved across the floor like something alive and tender. Then you are already home, the old person said. This is perhaps the deepest teaching we have touched tonight. That peace is not something we create. It is something we uncover, something we allow, something that has been here all along, beneath the busyness and the worry and the striving, waiting with infinite patience for us to turn toward it. And when we do, when we allow even a small measure of that peace to settle into our bones and our breath, it does not stay with us alone. It moves outward, in widening circles, like a stone dropped into still water. It touches the people closest to us first, our families, our friends, the ones who share our days. And then it reaches further to the colleagues, the acquaintances, the strangers we pass on the street. And then further still, in ways we cannot trace and may never know. You do not have to be a monk or a saint or a keeper of a tea house to be that calm person in the boat. You do not have to have all the answers, or have resolved all your struggles, or have achieved some perfect state of inner quiet. You simply have to be willing to pause, willing to breathe, willing to let the storm do what storms do, and to find, somewhere inside yourself, a place that is still. That willingness is enough. It has always been enough. And so, as we come to the end of our journey together, let us hold this one gentle truth, that your peace matters, not only to you, but to everyone whose life touches yours. Every moment of calm you cultivate, every breath you take with awareness, every time you choose gentleness over haste, you are lighting a candle in a dark room. And that light, small as it may seem, reaches further than you will ever know. The Buddha, on the night of his awakening, is said to have touched the earth with his hand. Not the sky, not the heavens, the earth, as if to say, here, right here, this is where peace lives. Not somewhere else, not in some distant future. Here, in this body, in this breath, in this moment, right here, right now, with you. Let us rest here together for a moment. Feel the weight of your body. Feel the ease of your breath. You have come a long way tonight, and you have arrived exactly where you need to be. When you are ready, we will share a few final words together. And so we come to the end of our time together. Tonight, we have walked a gentle path. We have dived beneath the waves and found that the ocean is always still in its depths. We have seen the calm stranger on the road and felt the quiet power of a life lived at peace. We have listened for the shy voices that speak only when we are finally still enough to hear them. We have learned to notice, with kindness and curiosity, the small ways we set our peace down without realizing it. We have felt the warm light of compassion for ourselves and for each other. And we have discovered that our calm, however small and quiet it may seem, is a gift that reaches far beyond ourselves. These are not new ideas. They are ancient ones, carried across centuries by teachers and students, by parents and children, by quiet strangers on dusty roads. They have survived because they are true, and they are here for you whenever you need them. Not just tonight, but always. You do not have to hold on to anything from this evening. Whatever has touched you will stay. Whatever you needed to hear, you have heard. And whatever peace you have found, even just a trace of it, a breath of it, a whisper, it is yours. It was always yours. So let your eyes close, if they have not already. Let your body be heavy. Let the world take care of itself for a while. You have done enough for today. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.